We are just days away from the 2020 election in what's certainly been some of the most contentious and divisive political conversations in our nation's history. But one group you'll often hear little from is those who have served or are serving our country. Veterans and active members of the military can often be quiet on voicing their support for or against a candidate. Following 20 years in the U.S. Air Force, retired Lieutenant Colonel John Paradis did something he previously had never done before, told us who he'll be voting for president in a column for the Daily Hampshire Gazette. He joins us now alongside Steve Connor, the Director of Central Hampshire Veterans Services, and Christian Appy. He's a history professor at UMass Amherst and the author of several books, including American Reckoning, the Vietnam War, and Our National Identity. Thanks to all three of you for joining us. John, I want to start with you. What compelled you to write this column?
Sure. So I think, just looking at the past 4 years, I just came to the realization that I'm not sure as a nation if we can really survive another 4 years under a Trump administration. And I say that as someone who, for me, character really matters, and that for anyone who has ever worn the uniform, the role of the commander-in-chief requires principled leadership. It requires depth of character, selfless devotion to duty and country, integrity, decency, a sense of respect, someone that reflects the values of our nation. And I truly believe that, we need a president for all Americans, not just for half of Americans. And I think the other two key points that I've observed with other military officers, and certainly senior military officers who have spoken out this campaign season, is you often hear the terms transformational leadership. And transformational leadership is a very big tenet among the officer corps and among non-commissioned officers as well. And that's ensuring that you have the trust and confidence of those you lead, and that you as a leader are really centered on the higher needs of the entire unit organization. And it's all about selfless service, which is really a component among all the services for our core values. When you look at President Trump's leadership style, the term that's been used often is it's very transactional. It's a quid pro quo style. It's what's in it for me. It's gaining more power for himself. And those of us that have served in the military, who have all looked at a model of leadership that's really based on also servant leadership, that it's about, a motivation that's about love, about unending, unconditional service for one another, because you're putting your life on the line when you're serving our country to serve others. And so when you take all those considerations and you look at the past 4 years, many of us who have served really see that we have a commander-in-chief who's unfit. And it's really very hard for us who have served to be able to come out and say that, again, for the first time in my time. But I think it's very compelling to see so many of us that are speaking out at this time.
Chris Appy, you've written extensively about American wars, the soldiers that fight in them, and the impact that it has on both our politics and our culture. Is what John is describing here, this feeling that soldiers or veterans can't really say everything they would want to about a sitting president. Is this something that you've encountered in conversations with soldiers over the years?
Well, John has taken a very principled stand, both during the years when he refrained from open political commentary, and again now when he's decided to speak out. I think within the military, there's been a variety of responses, particularly in extreme times. I mean, during the Vietnam War, active duty military personnel as well as veterans became so enraged by the ongoing war in Vietnam that they did begin to speak out. Most operated under the constraints of the military, which forbade political activity on duty. but did believe as citizens that they had a right and responsibility to engage in political protest. One famous case that I know very well is a Navy nurse named Susan Schnall in 1968 decided that she would participate in uniform in an anti-war demonstration for which she was court-martialed. Her reasoning, which is interesting, is that we had such a double standard that uniformed high-ranking officers like William Westmoreland are allowed to go and speak in front of Congress or the National Press Club and advocate further escalation and the policies of the administration, that seems to be okay. But dissidents at lower ranks are supposed to maintain silence. So yeah, excuse me, there have been a variety of responses to the sort of political responsibilities of the military service, as well as trying to weigh the other responsibilities of citizenship. And so it's not an easy issue, and it can cut both ways. I certainly don't want officers to be cheerleading for ongoing militarization, and thereby kind of cutting the line between civilian military. We really do have a system that's based on civilian rule of the military, which I think we need to honor, and has been flouted. I mean, I'll stop talking, but just what's probably fresh in the memory of most viewers is this moment in June when Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, in his battle fatigues, marched out to Lafayette Square alongside the president in what was clearly a political act. And he apologized for that, as he should have. But we've seen far too many of these kinds of ways of politicizing politics from people who shouldn't be.
There's also the conversations that are likely happening amongst veterans and those that are serving that live in communities around here in Western Massachusetts. Steve Connor, you work with veterans across Hampshire County every day. You yourself, you served in the Navy. What's your sense of the feeling that those in the military community are having right now around this?
Well, the one thing people have to remember is those that join the military come from a varied amount of backgrounds. So there is big a divide in veteran community as there is in the regular community about this particular president. And there's always been in previous presidents. When you're serving, you do not, you might sit around having a beer and chat about it, but you don't ever go on the record while you're serving. But many veterans after, they have strong opinions. When you serve, you go by a chain of command, and some people are in favor of this president because he shows a strong hand, and they like to see a strong leader that makes decisions. And I understand where that comes from. I just wish they would look at the captain of that ship, and it just came into my head when you guys were talking, who was trying to protect his troops, the sailors on his ship from COVID-19, and was trying to do it all the ways you're supposed to, and then got so fed up that he went outside the system. So yes, he kind of like broke a little bit of the code, but the reaction of his sailors on that ship is exactly what you want out of your leader. You don't want half the ship applauding him and the other half going, you caused this, or, you just don't want that. And I think we're in that situation where things are in the regular culture really divided. It's the same thing in the veteran world. There are people who have served honorably. They served by definition for the Constitution. And there are others that serve, they really like the idea of a strong man in office. And, we avoid those conversations within our communities just like others do. And we do it for the sake of whatever our ceremony might be or whatever. We just start off by saying, we're not going to talk politics because we're just as divided.
I want to read a quote from John, your column. You said in it that it was strictly off limits, period, to be partisan by law and by decorum. I want to start with the decorum part of that. Where do you think this notion or this long-standing tradition came from that those within the military community, it's not proper, it's not considered appropriate to speak your mind openly about your political opinions? Where did that come from?
Well, I think it's in part an unwritten rule, but it's certainly in keeping with the leadership principles of the officer corps, in good command and control, in good order and discipline, and certainly under normal circumstances, under normal times, the doctrine of separation of military with civilian political affairs works, right? It works just fine. I mean, believe me, it's military officers do not want to take this mantle up. We don't want to enter into this vortex. They just want to do their jobs. They want to keep their political views private. They want to, serve our country surely and steadily, and that's what they're focused on. They're focused on doing the mission, and they let the civilian apparatus do its job. But where the system breaks down is when you can't have trust and faith in civilian institutions to do their part in upholding their oath of office in defending the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I think that's where we are as a country right now, and why you see so many, military officers and senior military leaders that are speaking out. I mean, in my 30 years, 20 years in uniform, and now as a veteran, I have never expressed these types of opinions, and I haven't seen this level of alarm. I mean, you're talking very seasoned, experienced, and extremely well-respected senior military leaders, folks like General Mattis, General Kelly, Admiral McRaven, General McCaffrey, General Powell, General Hayden, former director of the CIA and NSA, former Vietnam POW, Air Force General Chuck Boyd. I mean, these are folks that in my generation are the contemporaries of the General Eisenhowers of our era. I mean, these are extremely well-respected men. And for them to talk in terms of this is a disaster, what we're seeing, to say that there is danger to our democracy and feel so compelled that they can no longer stay quiet, that to me is a watershed moment in our nation. And so I guess I don't know if I directly answer your question, but I would say that, there are very few times in our history, and perhaps going back to the Vietnam War is certainly one example, and then perhaps back to the Civil War, where we've had this level of discourse where we really feel compelled to speak out. But I've served under Republican administrations. I didn't necessarily agree with some of the things that we were tasked or ordered to do. I went to war under different presidential administrations, and regardless, I respected the individual in the office. I understood, I appreciated his character, and at the end of the day, I firmly believe that he was doing what he was doing in the best interest of all Americans, even though I may not necessarily agree with the decision. And it was my job to carry out good order and discipline, to carry out the mission I was asked to do. We're at a stage in our American existence where we're questioning that right now.
I'm curious to hear your take on this, Steve, this aspect of decorum. Do you think that it's right that this should be the case? I mean, the way I sort of am seeing this now based on what I'm hearing from all three of you is, depending on what your outlook on this is that soldiers and those in the military community can kind of occupy this gray space in our political dialogue.
The thing of being and serving, and I did this when I was in, is I did my absentee ballot, and they continue to do that, but that's a private kind of personal thing. And I guess you really didn't feel like you should get into a big argument about it. Now, of course, when I was in, I think that was the last time we had somebody who had served who was president, and that was Jimmy Carter. I mean, George H.W. Bush. But there was a sense that even if they were Republican or Democrat, as John said, that you had to look to them because they were your boss. They're the commander in chief. And while you're serving, you kind of respect that. You also respect those people that had served because you know that if they served, they're not going to send you off into combat, send you someplace on a whim, on a reaction. And I think one of the things that a lot of the military is feeling now is that, especially when they were using troops to clear out a section of our own capital so that they could have an event, that the military got so unsettled with that because you don't use the military on your own people. They are for foreign invaders, for protection, for defense. And I think anybody who served would be very shaken by that whole thing that it went on, whatever your political views are. We're not there. And even as veterans, so many, even if they still are going to vote for him, still were very unsettled by that behavior. We're not supposed to be political in the military.
So that is the decorum aspect of it, but then there's also a lot of legal language that can be viewed as tenuous for those that are in the military world. This can include the Hatch Act, which a lot of people have heard over the last several months in reference to President Trump, most specifically the use of the White House for political events. He, of course, accepted the nomination at this year's GOP convention at the White House. Chris Appy, can you provide a brief explanation of the Hatch Act and how this can also extend to military members as a part of the executive branch?
Yes, the Hatch Act was a 1939 act which was intended to forbid federal employees from engaging in political activities in an official capacity. It did leave open the possibility that people could be citizens outside of work, or in the case of the military, outside of uniform, but it was intended to prevent the politicizing of federal employment so that your conduct and your advancement would be based on merit rather than political coercion or political pressure. So there's, the spirit of the law, I think, has some good things about it, even though it has been violated many times over the years, and particularly in the last 4 years. I mean, I think Ivanka Trump has violated it hundreds of times, and just look at her Twitter account. So it unfortunately, so it doesn't have the kind of teeth in it in terms of enforcement, that it's really more almost like a sort of self-regulation instilled, and most people, I do think, try to abide by it and don't engage in open and flagrant politics while still trying to carry out their duties as citizens on their own time. But yeah, it's a combination of tradition, and the military does occasionally put out directives on what you can and can't do. But yeah, it's something that maybe we need to debate once again, as a country. What are the guidelines and how will they be enforced, or will they be? Because clearly in the last 4 years, with a president more than any other, by far more than any other president who has not only violated the Hatch Act, but has shown utter disregard, blatant disregard for his own military. I mean, it's just really unprecedented.
It's interesting because it seems like veterans, soldiers, families of the military seem to almost be a demographic within themselves in the election cycles that we experience, almost in the same way that men 18 to 35 or suburban women are also considered an audience to target in your campaign. I'm curious to hear, and let's start with John on this, what is your opinion about the way that the military and what it represents in America has come to be used in our political campaigns and throughout our election cycles? Because it seems like from what you're all describing, in some cases, whether it's through decorum or through law, it's not appropriate for military members to comment on those that are running for office, but those that are running for office can continue to praise the virtues of those that are in the military wherever they're campaigning.
first and most importantly, that the public needs to understand that our military is an all-volunteer force, right? Since the end of the draft, following the Vietnam War, that by and large, many enter the service for occupation, for a start in life, for GI Bill, things like that. But by and large, many of us who have served do it to be part of something larger than ourselves. And I think, when we see the military used kind of as props, and appropriating patriotism and using the military for political reasons, and also going back to what I mentioned earlier about the transactional way of leadership, where if hey, listen, if we're going to be good for the military, for defense and for defense dollars, then I can buy your vote. I can buy your love by giving you a strong military budget and defense. And I think that doesn't resonate well with an all-volunteer force who's looking at service beyond those types of things. And so I think, one of the watershed moments for me was the allegations, and I don't think the president has convincingly, denied these allegations of calling military members losers and suckers. That is a deep, it hits you to the core when you hear that coming from our commander in chief, the leader of our nation. And many have corroborated this. So it's pretty damning that we're hearing this. Taxes, military members by and large aren't making six figures or more, right? I mean, they're paying more than their fair share of taxes, and to see a president who's paid $750 a year or is not paid his income tax, that's also something that I've heard from active duty military that are, what is this? The whole concept of loyalty in the military, that it's two-way, it's not just one way, and that respect is earned. So again, when you see things like Steve mentioned about Lafayette Square or parades, just the very essence of bringing senior military officers into the administration with great fanfare, and then it doesn't work out because they morally, ethically, or they just see a lack of competence or a refusal for the commander-in-chief to listen to their seasoned senior military advice. That does not sit well in the foxhole. And when they're insulted on the way out, what does that say to the troops on the ground? Here's someone that we've respected our entire lives, that they're the very essence of leadership, and out the door they're insulted and bullied and belittled. That is incredibly hurtful to the morale of our men and women, and therefore goes to the whole essence of national security if you have a demoralized military. And then the final thing I would say is COVID-19 right now. And in the military, it's really important to see leaders that lead by example and holding people accountable for their actions. And I've got to say, I think, what I'm hearing is that the messaging from the White House that we're turning the corner and that we've got this, that the pandemic is ending, when we know the facts. So not telling the truth, all these things, accountability, it all brings back to the level of trust and confidence we have in our leadership and in the chain of command.
Lastly, and I'll ask for a brief response from each of you on this question, and we'll start with Steve Connor. Do you think this is going to serve as a turning point for how members of the military view their role in political discourse?
That's a tough one. I think it can, depending on how the results are. And when I say the results, about how many veterans actually or how many service members voted, and they will make estimates of how many went one side or another. I think if you see a more of a 50-50 vote, or maybe even higher on the Biden side, that will be telling, because I think there is a lot of pain that's come with this president and how he's talked about the military, about the soldiers, the sailors, and the Gold Star families. I think the military deserves more respect, and they may be demanding it, but we'll see.
Chris Appy, what do you think this holds for us moving forward?
Well, I hope it will lessen the gap between civil-military gap that has been growing for decades and increase conversation between those groups. You know, as John was saying, the military is too often used as a prop, and we have had for now a long time a lot of lip service to the need to thank our troops, support them, but that has not been accompanied by serious discussion between people who've had military service and those who haven't. And I think that that really will, if it happens, and I do hope this moment makes it happen more, that would really, as much as anything, enhance our democracy. Because military people, yes, they may and should honor certain restrictions about what they can say, but they should be open to discussions with civilians and vice versa. Civilians have something to offer too, and we shouldn't assume that only people in the military can tell us what our foreign policy should be, for example. So this is an important moment, and I hope it does improve democracy.
And John, it was your column that started this whole conversation.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with Chris and Steve, particularly Chris's sentiment that the widening civil-military divide in our nation, if there's something that can be taken from this political season, it's to get a better understanding of what it means to serve, and emphatically agree with that it's not just those in the military that serve our nation, and it's incumbent upon all of us to speak out when we see injustice, when we see something not right. Truth matters. The truth matters, particularly for those of us who have served in the military and are still in a national security realm. Truth is life or death. Particularly, you know, in the realm of military intelligence, operations, command and control, truth really matters. And then finally, I'd say character matters. If character doesn't matter, then, you know, in my opinion, all is lost. I hate to be dire about that and end on that kind of negative note, but that's, in my opinion, what's at stake here. It's the very values of our nation, and that truly character has to matter. So, you know, I want people to think about that and consider that in good conscience when they go to bed at night. You know, what are they seeing in our nation, and using their voices to speak up, lest you know, in the next 4 years, what we're going to be facing in our nation.